Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Plowshares Fund podcast dedicated to all things nuclear.
I'm joined now by Tom Killough, Director of Policy.
Joe Cirincione, President of the Plowshares Fund.
Philip Yoon, the Executive Director of the Plowshares Fund.
Development Director from Plowshares Fund, Elizabeth Warner.
And here's your host, Joe Cirincione.
Thank you, Del, and thank you for listening. This is episode 5 of Press the Button, and it's something special. We have a fabulous interview with Ambassador Wendy Sherman to help walk us through the twin crises with Iran and North Korea that are developing. In fact, we're devoting our whole episode to these two crises. We're going to begin with a synopsis of the news, and we brought in Kelsey Davenport from the Arms Control Association, one of the country's leading experts on Iran, to help us understand that aspect. And if you've been listening, you know that our news is done in a particular 7-minute format. We do this because if our computers and sensors warn of an incoming nuclear attack, that is the maximum amount of time the president has to decide whether to press the button, even though he may not know whether the attack is real or not. The clock is ticking. Let's go.
And now, early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
It's a rainy, chilly May day here in the glass enclosed headquarters of Plowshares, D.C. The Washington Monument is shrouded in clouds, not exactly your normal spring day. And then it's sort of fitting for the mood, because we're in trouble in both our Iran and North Korea policy. And fortunately, to help explain all this, we're joined by Catherine Killough, who is the Roger Hale Fellow at Plowshares Fund, specializing in Korean policy, and a special guest, Kelsey Davenport, who's the Director for Nonproliferation Policy at the Arms Control Association, and an expert on Iran. And Kelsey, we're going to start with you. Can you just bring us up to date on what's happening with the Iranian position? They announced last week that they were going to stop complying with certain aspects of the Iran anti-nuclear agreement. What exactly are they doing?
Well, first, I think it's important to put Iran's actions in perspective and in context. Iran announced that it was no longer going to be bound by certain limits under the deal after an entire year of U.S. actions that were designed to systemically deny Iran any benefits from complying with the JCPOA. So the United States has really pushed Iran to take these steps. Now, if we look at what Iran has actually threatened to do, they've said they will no longer abide by a limit on heavy water and a limit imposed by the deal on their stockpile of enriched uranium. Now, of course, any violation of the nuclear agreement is problematic, but from a proliferation perspective, these are very low-risk actions that Iran is threatening to take. And I emphasize threatening to take because Iran has not yet breached these limits. So right now, this is just Iran saying it will no longer abide by them. There's been no breach of the deal yet. But if Iran does move forward and breach these limits, again, a very low proliferation risk. Having excess heavy water does not really give Iran any benefit. They don't have a reactor that runs on heavy water that's operational at this point.
Right, the heavy water is used as a moderator for nuclear reactions in a reactor, but there is no reactor to moderate.
Exactly, and Iran is years away from having a reactor. Now, if Iran were to build such a reactor, that would be a risk because those reactors can produce plutonium.
So right now would be a technical violation, but not a military threat.
Exactly.
And the other one?
So the other limit that Iran has threatened to breach is on the stockpile of low-enriched uranium. Now, Iran is limited to 300 kilograms of uranium enriched to 3.67% under the deal. Weapons-grade uranium is enriched to 90%. So if Iran has slightly more than 300 kilograms of enriched uranium at this 3.67% level, yes, it's worrisome because it is a violation of the deal, but it's not going to significantly change the time it would take Iran to produce enough nuclear material for a weapon.
And if they were to go to a bomb production mode, we would see that. We would know this. The accumulation is worrisome, but again, not a direct military risk.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, why don't they just produce less? Why breach the limit at all?
Well, I think if we look at the environment surrounding the JCPOA, the United States has taken steps to deny Iran every benefit that the deal was intended to provide. Just in the weeks prior to Iran's announcement, the United States said that it would no longer issue waivers allowing Iran to sell even limited amounts of oil, and that's Iran's key export. The United States also limited some of the nuclear cooperation waivers, meaning that Iran is no longer able to ship out excess heavy water, and they're no longer able to transfer low-enriched uranium out of the country.
So they can't get rid of the surplus that they build up.
Well, Iran has other options for getting rid of the surplus. It can downblend the uranium. It could stop production of heavy water. So Iran does have options for staying below the cap. But I think Iran could certainly argue that the United States has put it in the position to breach these limits down the road.
Yes, okay. We're going to come back to you in just a second. But first, I want to hear from Catherine on the missile tests that North Korea has conducted in the last couple of weeks. How serious a threat are these?
Well, it's not looking so good. On last Thursday, North Korea test-fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles. And this comes on the heels of another test that North Korea did just 5 days prior, which was multiple projectiles into the EC. Now, we haven't seen this level of provocation since November of 2017. That was when North Korea tested its intercontinental ballistic missile. But I think it's still worth emphasizing just how significant these latest tests are, because it shows a level of technical advancement we haven't seen from North Korea. These short-range missiles essentially make it more difficult to penetrate the missile defense systems in South Korea. And that does not bode well for our South Korean allies.
I mean, it's more difficult for the interceptors to hit these missiles.
Yes. Yeah. So all this drives home the point that, despite what President Trump is tweeting, we are seeing a return to a cycle of military provocations that we haven't seen since 2017. So sustaining talks matter. Test moratoriums matter. North Korea still has a long ways to go to perfect these missiles. And making a deal, even a limited one, that gets us towards a more comprehensive deal is important. So when we look back to Hanoi, it's starting to look like maybe we should have taken what was on the table and worked with what we had to work with there, as opposed to completely abandoning the process.
Can I press you a little bit on that?
Sure.
Bolton, through Trump, presented an all-or-nothing deal, so North Korea had to completely disarm before we'd consider sanctions. Kim offered a limited shutdown of some sites in exchange for massive sanctions relief. Now, that's a deal that I wouldn't have taken, but you mean there was something that could have been worked out, a step-by-step, a freeze, a dismantlement in exchange for some sanctions relief?
I think so. I mean, I think an offer was made and it was immediately rejected.
Yes.
And the summit ended early and both parties walked away. There must have been an opportunity there to initiate some kind of agreement.
Well, let's hope there is. Let's hope we can get us a little more Steve Biegun, a little less John Bolton. Thank you very much. And speaking of diplomacy, Mike Pompeo crashed a meeting of the European Union this week, showed up unannounced, uninvited, to try to apparently pressure the European Union members into acceding to the Trump administration demands on North Korea. Do you know anything about this, Kelsey?
Well, it appears that Pompeo is looking for the Europeans to rubber stamp the U.S. approach to the deal, and that Washington has typically tried to persuade Brussels that Iran's destabilizing actions are enough of a reason for the U.S. policy and for the U.S. decision to unilaterally withdraw from the agreement.
You better hurry up. We're running out of time. Quick. So did it work?
I think the Europeans understand that the JCPOA is in their security interests, and I think we'll continue to see them fight for the preservation of the agreement.
Oh, time is up. Sorry we didn't have more time to go into this. Thank you very much, Kelsey, for joining us. Thank you very much, Catherine. We have something special for you today in the interview segment. When I heard that Ambassador Wendy Sherman was in town, I seized the opportunity, ran over to the Capitol Hilton where she was staying, and grabbed an interview with her in between meetings. Ambassador Sherman is a professor up at the Harvard Kennedy School, but more importantly, she's one of this country's leading practitioners of diplomacy with Iran and North Korea. She helped negotiate the crucial Iran anti-nuclear deal when she was Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration, and when she was a counselor at the Department of State for Secretary Madeleine Albright in the Clinton administration. She was the policy coordinator for North Korea and made many trips over there. The perfect person to talk to about these twin crises. Take a listen. Events are moving very rapidly with Iran. How worried are you?
I'm pretty worried. I think we're in an escalatory cycle. I think that President Rouhani tried to thread the needle very carefully to not immediately breach the agreement, to create a process of decision-making. But I believe that the National Security Advisor of the United States, John Bolton, who's never seen a war he didn't want to wage, is leading President Trump to a potential conflict with Iran, which could turn into an Arab-Persian war of great significance.
This does seem to be a plan. That is, rather than responding to Iranian actions, Bolton, since he's assumed the office, seems to be putting in a step-by-step pressure campaign. Do you see it the same way?
I do see it that way, but more than a pressure campaign, Joe, I think it is a campaign to unravel the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, to goad the Iranians into breaching the agreement because they feel they no longer have any choice, just as the president's trying to goad the United States Congress into a premature impeachment before all the facts are being shown. So I think that we are in a very difficult place. I don't really think that Donald Trump wants to go to war. Right. He waged his campaign on getting American troops out of places, not into places. And I think he's beginning to feel like his national security advisor is pressing him to go to war in Venezuela, to go to war with Iran, hopefully not to go to war with North Korea at the same time.
You know, I was struck by the announcement that we were moving an aircraft carrier closer to Iran that was made by John Bolton, not by President Trump, and that the red line he drew was so broad. And he said the U.S. would respond to any attack by Iran, its forces, or its proxies on the U.S. forces, or our allies. So that means if the Houthis in Yemen shoot down a Saudi aircraft, that could be a spark that would lead to war.
There are many ways that this could get completely out of control very quickly. And I think that, Secretary Pompeo went to Iraq to show a solidarity with the troops and to say that the Iraqi government shouldn't fall for what the Iranians are suggesting. But I think what it's doing instead is upping the pressure in ways that are not helpful and actually increase the risk to our troops.
In Iraq? Or
in Iraq and in general, everywhere we have troops. That happened as soon as we designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization, and they reciprocated. That means that any American soldier is at risk.
So we've seen headlines that there's intelligence that Iran may be planning attacks on U.S. forces. It's unclear whose intelligence that is. Some reports are that it's Israeli. Do you know if U.S. intelligence has picked up the same indicators that Mossad has?
I don't have access to that information, but there are a lot of questions out there about how deep that intelligence is. And it's no secret that Iran funds proxies in the Middle East.
Yes.
It is the reason we wanted to get the nuclear weapons off the table so they wouldn't deter our actions in the Middle East with our partners and allies, and we could use existing sanctions to pressure Iran to deal with their malign behavior in the region and their state sponsorship of terrorism. So I'm not at all surprised there is intelligence that says they want to fund proxies.
The president, his spokespeople claim that their strategy is working, that they got out of the Iran anti-nuclear deal, the worst deal ever negotiated, says Trump, and that since then their pressure campaign has paid off. Do you see it the same way? Do you think their strategy is working?
Well, if working means that there is more malign behavior in the Middle East, that Americans remain in prison in Iran and missing in Iran, if it means that human freedom and human rights have not improved at all in Iran, if it means that Iran is increasing its alliances with countries around the world that do not share our interests, then I guess that's success. But it's a heck of a measure of a bad success in my view.
This strategy seems to have divided us from our closest allies.
Absolutely.
I mean, right now, the Europeans are scrambling for ways to keep the deal alive and to try to give Iran some of the sanctions benefit that was promised to them. What do you hear from the Europeans on this?
Europeans are in an impossible position. They're not going to be able to counter U.S. economic and oil sanctions without a very heavy cost, and a cost I think it will be very difficult for them and for the companies in those countries to pay. I think they would like to keep it together. They have all encouraged the Iranians to keep the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, acknowledging at the same time that Iran is in a very difficult position.
Now, Trump has said he wants to negotiate a better deal, and it's unclear whether this is another, unicorn strategy. Put out the idea that there's some better deal, so therefore I can kill the deal we have. But is it possible that there might be some kind of negotiations? Do you think it's possible that the Iranians could meet with Trump or a Trump official over this?
I suppose anything's possible, but from an Iranian point of view, in a culture where resistance is an important value, I think it is highly unlikely, as the Iranians have said themselves, they won't be bullied into a negotiation, but they may get to a place where they will have to have a conversation. But it will not be on Donald Trump's terms. It will be on terms that they lay out. And quite frankly, it's hard to imagine them entering a negotiation with this administration after the administration pulled out of the one agreement that everybody else in the world supported.
Right. And of course, it couldn't be one that's based on Secretary Pompeo's 12 points. If those are preconditions, there's no way Iran could enter into talks on that basis, right?
Indeed. We have heard the State Department reiterate those 12 issues that have to be addressed. That's a heck of a high bar, and that's a negotiation that would go on for a very long time. And if you try to do all 12 at once, you end up with a mediocre middle on everything, or you're asking Iran to capitulate 100%.
Right.
That never happens in a negotiation.
Right. Well, that's why when you were negotiating the Iran anti-nuclear deal, you didn't have it include everything, that you tried to focus on the biggest danger to us.
Absolutely. And to make sure, as I said earlier, that a nuclear weapon was taken off the table, because as much bad behavior as there is in the Middle East, if they had a nuclear weapon, they could project power into the region in a way that would and could effectively deter our actions.
So let me just ask you to go back just a couple of years. Was it even possible? Was it possible when you began the negotiations with Iran to have a big deal, to negotiate their relations with Israel and Saudi Arabia and their oppression of their own people? Could you have done all of that at once?
I doubt it seriously. I don't think Iran was up for doing that. I don't think their politics allowed them to do that. I think that, the Supreme Leader, we tend to think he makes all decisions because he has the name Supreme Leader, but there are politics in Iran. There are hardliners and there are hardliners, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the hardliners. And so if the Supreme Leader was going to let President Rouhani, and quite frankly, Ahmadinejad, proceed with a negotiation with the United States, somehow he needed to make sure that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which didn't want a negotiation, stayed on side. So it would have been, I think, virtually impossible to do everything.
It sounds good, a big deal, settle all our differences, but it's impossible to achieve, which gets me back to Bolton. So what do you think his game is here? What knowing that he works for a president that campaigned on not going to war, pulling us out of the wars, what is Bolton trying to do here?
I think Bolton believes that the president likes to talk tough, that his supporters like his tough talk, that the president likes to be maximalist about all things. And so Bolton can take that attitude and the attitude of, can I goad my enemy into doing bad things so I can come out the hero, and as he did with Fire and Fury in North Korea. I think Bolton is using some of the attributes of the president to lead the president down a path that, quite frankly, I'm not sure the president wants to go on.
Right, so he may be thinking that this is a negotiating strategy. Tough,
Right.
tough, and then you go make a deal.
Yes.
But for Bolton, the deal is not the point.
Now, I think the point is that Iran's regime should fall.
Yes.
And if that can't be done by the people of Iran, then perhaps outside pressure can make it happen.
So this idea that somehow you can either back Iran into a corner or give it a bloody nose, and that somehow the regime is so fragile that it will collapse, or worse comes to worse, we fight a war and we win. That's basically it?
Sort of seems that way. You know, I can't get into John Bolton's
Right.
head. I don't want to be in John Bolton's head.
Well, this is what he was saying during the Iraq War.
Yes.
This is the plan. This is what they
Yes.
thought they could do with Saddam, right?
Yes,
And then we were
absolutely.
greeted as liberators.
Right, that, you know, shock and awe would lead to flowers.
Let me ask you one other thing. This administration hardly ever, I would say never, talks about Iran without using the word terrorist. I mean, this seems to be a conscious strategy for them to link Iran to terrorist networks, for example, implying that they're somehow behind Al-Qaeda, they're somehow behind ISIS. Again, straight out of the Iraq playbook. So what do you think
Yes,
about
I mean,
that?
look, Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism.
And what do you mean by that?
They fund Hezbollah.
Hezbollah.
They fund Hamas.
So which we categorize as terrorist groups.
Right. They do support the Houthis, who aren't terrorists.
Well, there's a rumor that the Trump administration wants to declare the Houthis
Well, I would not be surprised.
a terrorist organization.
Well, I would not be surprised if they do that. So, yes, I see the connection
Yes.
made here, and there is some reality to them
Yes.
being a state sponsor of terrorism, but it is not ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And in fact, they have suffered from the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And look, I'm not an apologist for Iran. I
Absolutely.
do not trust them. They are doing very bad things to their own people. They are doing very bad things to foreign nationals in their jails. They are doing terrible things in the Middle East. There is a lot of behavior that puts people's lives at risk that is terrorist-based in
Yes.
supporting terrorist organizations. So because they are that kind of country, why would the President of the United States want to create a situation where he goads Iran into giving up an anti-nuclear deal, as you put it, and starting down to the path again to having a nuclear weapon? How is that success?
Right. So what advice would you give Democrats right now on the campaign trail in Congress? How do they counter this strategy? I mean, this is the commander-in-chief. He is running the national security strategy of the United States, or John Bolton is in his name. What do we do now to try to reduce the prospects of war?
Well, I think that we need to make it clear why the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action matters.
Yes.
I think virtually every Democrat running has said they would try to re-enter the agreement. Yes, there's likely to be a follow-on agreement at some point, as there are in all arms control situations, and that we use the sanctions that we do have to work with our allies and partners in the region to stop their malign behavior. What I would not do is turn our backs on our friends and our allies. The British, the French, the Germans, the European Union are trying to hold peace together. I don't want to encourage them into the arms of Russia and China. I want them to be on side with us in what we do. And right now, they are really caught between what President Trump wants to do, or John Bolton wants to do, and what is in really best for the safety and security of the United States, for themselves and for the world.
So Democrats, progressives should be supporting the European efforts, encouraging them to try to find some sort of compromise here that can keep the Iran deal together.
Yes, I think that will be exceedingly difficult to do.
Yes.
And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are asking Europe to act in a manner that goes against all of the rules that we all wrote together.
That's right.
After World War II.
That's right. So we're asking them to take our best chance for peace is that they take actions that oppose the U.S. actions.
Exactly. What a strange and unhelpful place to be. And dangerous, very dangerous.
While the situation in the Persian Gulf is heating up, the situation in the Korean Peninsula is also starting to escalate. We've seen 2 rounds of projectile tests short-range rockets and missiles. We see the U.S. seizure of a North Korean ship, and there may be other actions yet to come. How worried are you about the security situation in the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I'm worried, though. The kinds of actions that Kim Jong-un has taken are sort of right out of the North Koreans' playbook. When they think that people aren't paying attention to them, they do something. They take some action.
Right. I've compared Kim Jong-un to the Glenn Close character in Fatal Attraction. I will not be ignored.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a great.
So you think Trump basically wants to do this, just leave the whole thing on the back burner for a while, but Kim won't let him.
Yeah, won't let him, wants to be paid attention to, wants some progress, wants to show some economic benefit for his country. He had started to put himself on the world stage, and he doesn't want to come off of it. And so the president has a big challenge here, which is how to keep the pressure on North Korea while at the same time trying to find a way forward. As long as John Bolton and Secretary Pompeo urge the president to be absolutely maximalist. You do everything North Korea, you get rid of everything,
yes,
or nothing happens for you. I think there will be no progress. That certainly should be the objective. That should be the mission here. But sometimes you reach your end goal in stages. And this is a situation where I suspect that we will need to contain this situation, take steps forward, and ultimately get to a complete and verifiable denuclearization. But that's not going to happen in one fell swoop.
Right, so it would be a good thing if the president adjusted tactics and moved to a phased approach, a step-by-step approach. And you wouldn't criticize him for being weak because he got a freeze and a partial rollback as a first phase.
I would not be critical of him as long as he had a plan and a strategy to keep going.
Yes.
And I haven't seen a plan. I haven't seen a strategy. I've seen tactics. I've seen summits. I've seen photo ops. But I have yet to see a strategy.
A real plan.
A real plan.
And do you think there was an opportunity in Hanoi? You think there was a chance? I mean, Steve Biegun was very optimistic the weekend before going to Hanoi. And then I think you said the rug was pulled out from under him.
Yes, I think the rug was pulled out from under him. And I think that the maximalists took over. Look, the president was right not to take the deal of just closing down Kumchangni for all of this economic sanctions to be lifted.
Right, the plutonium production.
That is not a deal we should have agreed to.
Agreed.
But clearly there was a pre-deal that had been discussed. But I think that both Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump totally had mismatched expectations. I think that Donald Trump thought the bromance would mean that Kim Jong-un would fold, and Kim Jong-un thought the bromance meant he could get whatever he put on the table. They were both wrong.
So what's Kim Jong-un's plan now? I see he's made some, shall we say, personnel adjustments?
Yes, something like that.
The execution of several of his top aides.
Yes, which is how he operates in the world. He's a ruthless dictator, and no one should think otherwise.
Yes.
So when the President of the United States says, I'm with him, he should understand that Kim Jong-un is not with Donald Trump.
But then Kim meets with Vladimir Putin, meets with the leader of China. What's he doing? What do you think his game plan is now?
Well, I think his game plan is to try to move forward, get everybody on side with him, try to see if he can get some sanctions relief. South Korea would like there to be sanctions relief because they believe in opening the door to some economic cooperation. Perhaps we'll see the president of South Korea come to North Korea, or the North Korean leaders South Korea. Who knows what is in the offing here? I hope that by the time this podcast airs, that Steve Biegun has found his way into North Korea and there's an actual hard effort going on at a real negotiating level to try to find a step forward here.
We can only hope. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you, Joe.
And now, a special announcement about an upcoming Plowshares Fund event.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Fisk, Senior Development Officer at Plowshares Fund, and I'm here to tell you about an exciting event we have coming up on Monday, June 10th in San Francisco. The event, Chain Reaction 2019, will highlight a new moment we see now to reshape the national debate on nuclear strategy. We are thrilled to have Beatrice Finn, as our keynote speaker. She's the executive director of ICAN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons that won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. Other speakers include former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, author Eric Schlosser, and nuclear historian Alex Wellerstein. Tickets are on sale now at plowshares.org.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil and Megan McCall. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Theme music is by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.